A cat spent days sitting at his dog best friend's grave, refusing to leave. 9 million people watched. And then, just days later, he was gone too. This is one of those stories that reminds you how much animals feel and how much they love. His name was Toldo, and the dog he was mourning was named Ciccio. They had spent their entire lives together in a small Italian town called Montagnana, a place so quiet and ordinary that nothing like this had ever happened there before, and probably never will again. Now here's what makes this story different from every other sad animal story you've ever heard. This wasn't just a cat looking confused near a familiar spot. This was something deliberate, something that looked undeniably like grief. And the images of it spread around the world so fast that people who had never heard of Montagnana suddenly felt like they'd been there. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about how two completely different animals became inseparable and what their bond tells us about the emotional lives of animals. Ciccio was a golden retriever owned by an elderly Italian man named Renzo Iezzelli. And from the moment Toldo arrived in the household, these two animals were simply together. They ate together, they napped together, they wandered the property together. The family said it looked like they had made some kind of private agreement, a friendship neither of them needed anyone else to understand. There's a concept that animal behaviorists wrestle with constantly, whether animals can truly form cross-species bonds, or whether what we see as friendship is really just proximity and habit. But spend 5 minutes reading about Toldo and Ciccio, and that argument starts to feel a little thin. Now here's the part we haven't told you yet, and it matters. When Ciccio passed away, the Iezzelli family buried him in their local cemetery, a proper burial, the way many Italian families honor even their animal companions. And the next morning, Toldo was there, sitting at the grave, alone. Not pacing, not meowing, just there. Still and quiet in a way that people who saw him said was almost hard to look at. And this is where the story gets stranger and more heartbreaking all at once. Because Toldo didn't just show up once, he came back every single day. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. The family began to notice he was bringing things, small offerings, a stick, a leaf, a sprig of something from the garden. He would place them at the grave and then sit. Animal grief researchers have documented this kind of behavior in elephants, in chimpanzees, in dolphins, animals we expect to carry complex emotional lives. But a domestic cat, methodically visiting a grave, bringing small items as if performing a private ritual, that part stopped people cold. The story caught fire when a journalist from a regional Italian paper photographed Toldo at the grave. That photo spread. First across Italy, then across Europe, then globally. The image of a small cat, still, serious, almost somber, sitting on a patch of earth in a quiet Italian cemetery became one of those visuals that needed no caption. You just looked at it and felt something shift. This is the part that gets us every time. One of the images that circulated alongside this story, unearthed from historical archives in the wave of human interest this generated, was a striking old public domain photograph originally tied to the work of Russell Herman Conwell, the American pastor and author who lived from 1843 to 1925. Conwell was famous for one central belief, that ordinary people, in ordinary places, could witness extraordinary things if they simply paid attention. That idea, that the miraculous hides inside the mundane, feels almost like a caption for Toldo's story. A small Italian cat in a quiet town, doing something that the entire world stopped to look at. And the world did stop. 9 million views, comments in dozens of languages, people writing that they had to step away from their screens because they were crying at work. Others saying it was the first time in months that something on the internet had made them feel genuinely human. But here's the open question that lingered after the story spread, the thing nobody could quite resolve. Why did Toldo stop coming? Days after the story peaked, after the photos had circled the globe, after 9 million people had watched and wept, Toldo simply wasn't at the grave anymore. The family said he had begun to decline. He stopped eating. He grew still in the way cats sometimes do when something inside them has quietly changed. And then he was gone too. Now, we want to be careful here. We're not going to tell you that Toldo died of a broken heart, because that's a poetic human framing that animals can't verify, and probably wouldn't care about anyway. What we can tell you is what the family said, what the neighbors said, what people who had watched him day after day reported, that in his final weeks, Toldo Toldo seemed to be doing something, working through something, fulfilling something. Animal behaviorists who weighed in after the story broke were careful but honest. They said that while we can't project human emotional architecture onto animals, we also can't keep dismissing what we observe. Toldo's behavior fit documented patterns of animal mourning more closely than almost any domestic cat case on record. The consistency, the ritual, the deliberate placement of objects. These are not random behaviors. What they are exactly, we may never fully know. And maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't puzzles to solve. Some stories are just windows into how much bigger the emotional world around us is than we usually give it credit for. Toldo and Ciccio lived their whole lives together in a town most of the world had never heard of. They asked for nothing, explained nothing, needed no translation. And in the end, what Toldo did at that grave was something so recognizable that 9 million strangers felt it in their chest. If that isn't love, it's something close enough that the difference doesn't matter. Tell us, do you have a story about an animal who showed you grief or loyalty, or something you still can't fully explain? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, hitting that like button genuinely helps us find more stories just like this one. Stories that remind us the world is softer and stranger and more tender than it looks on most days. Subscribe if you want more of those. We'll be here.